Good morning. I want to talk today about the recent decision by the John Roberts Supreme Court that pretty much gives the President of the United States blanket immunity for all actions taken while in office. I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about some other decisions that the John Roberts Supreme Court has made over the years, and I'll discuss how they're going to impact the country for the rest of this decade, according to astrology. So let's see if I can share my screen here. Okay, this will just take a few seconds. I have to get rid of some panels so that I can see what I'm doing here. All right, I think I'm ready to start. So this presentation is titled Supreme Lunacy, America's Future in the Aftermath of the John Roberts Supreme Court. Now, some of the decisions that this court has made in recent years that I think are having and will have a very negative impact on America and its democracy are the following. First, we have Citizens United. That case has resulted in political campaigns now being dominated by dark money and donations from corporations and wealthy individuals. So if you're a billionaire, it's essentially you have more votes than the rest of us have because you can use your dollars to influence the opinions and the votes of many other people. And likewise for corporations. Okay, a few years ago, this court weakened the Voter Rights Act. That has resulted in more attempts at voter suppression by various states. And of course, not too long ago, the court overturned Roe v. Wade. And as a result, women's health care suffers as they lose in many states the right to control their own bodies. More recently, the court has weakened the regulatory power of federal agencies. And that means that more decisions will be made by judges instead of experts in the field. And very, very recently, they have given the president absolute immunity for official acts and presumed immunity for unofficial acts while president. As a result, the president may no longer be accountable for any actions taken while in office. This runs counter to our country's notions of equal justice for all, no man being above the law, and the fact that we have a president that is accountable rather than a king who is not accountable. Okay, now, I want to note a few things here. First, let's go back to the American Civil War, which began on April 12th, 1861 at 4:30 a.m. in the morning when the Confederates fired upon Fort Sumter. At that moment, transiting Neptune was at 29 degrees, 57 minutes of Pisces. Okay, now when a planet is in the last degree of a sign, we call that the anaretic degree. And basically, the influence of that sign that it's in is dying. And the influence of the next sign is soon going to begin. So it's like a death followed by a birth. And whenever something is dying, all the toxins, all the stuff that has been held inside, it tends to come out. So when a very slow moving planet is in the last degree of a sign, that's when all the negative things associated with that planet are more likely to appear. And in fact, I think this really starts about 3 degrees before the planet moves into the next sign. And I say that because Pluto was at 27 plus degrees of Capricorn when the Declaration of Independence came out. And that was a fight between our hope for rule by the people, as represented by Pluto in Aquarius, which was what was about to be birthed. It was that hope versus power in an individual represented by the King of England at that time. And we see that again when Putin invaded Ukraine in February of, 2022. Again, Pluto was at 27 degrees of Capricorn, 27 plus degrees, as in the last 3 degrees of that sign. And during that period, we have seen far right people, tin horn dictators trying to seize power as Pluto moved through those last few degrees of Aquarius. Now, that movement of Pluto at the end, let's see, I think I just said last few degrees of Aquarius. Sorry about that. I meant Pluto moving through the last few degrees of Capricorn. Okay. And Pluto's movement through the last few degrees of Capricorn, it has been followed by Neptune's movement through the last few degrees of Pisces. In the former situation, it's a question of who has the power, individuals or groups. In the latter situation, it has to do with ideologies which are going to be changing. And so with Neptune in the anaretic degree of Pisces, this is a time when the negative side of Neptune can be more easily seen. Damaging ideologies, lies, misrepresentation of the truth, and so on. Things like that. So this is what was happening at the time of the Civil War. Neptune was at 29 degrees, 57 minutes of Pisces and that anaretic degree. Okay, remember that position. We're going to come back to it in just a second. Now, if we look to see how the beginning of the Civil War impacted the chart for the United States, well, first off, the chart I prefer to use for America is this July 2nd, 1776 chart, that is the day that the Declaration of Independence was passed by the Continental Congress. On July 4th, they made a few minor tweaks to some of the text, and then they began printing it and distributing it to the people. Now, when it comes to the birth of America, I think that was more of a process than a single moment. There's several critical moments in the creation of the United States, and as a consequence, there are several charts that can be looked at and even considered birth charts. So I tend to have a preference for the July 2nd chart, but if you prefer the July 4th Sibley chart or any other July 4th chart, I think that chart is also valid and also has merit. I just simply feel that this one often works a little better. And then there are other charts that can be set up for things like the Articles of Confederation and the creation of the Constitution of the United States. Those charts are also valid and have worth. But getting back to the July 2nd, 1776 chart that I'll use, notice that when Neptune was at 29 degrees, 57 minutes of Pisces, it was making a very strong square to Venus at 0 degrees 23 minutes of Cancer. Okay, so this represents a conflict between beliefs, ideologies, uh, social frameworks, and uh, people's values, at least some people's values and their what they feel they need for their security. Okay, so this set up a conflict between the idea that everyone should be free and what those slaves, for instance, meant for people's financial security in the South and their core beliefs, their core values. Now, at the same time, transiting Mars and Uranus were both conjunct natal Uranus. And that's going to be true in both the July 2nd and July 4th charts. In fact, this square between Neptune and Venus also occurs in July 4th charts. It's simply stronger in the July 2nd chart. But with transiting Uranus and Mars conjunct natal Uranus, this is stirring up uh, tendencies toward violence and revolution, and also angry rhetoric, since this is in Gemini. Okay, now let's go to July 1st, 2024 at 7:30 a.m., which according to at least one source I found online, that is when this decision by the Supreme Court regarding presidential immunity was released. And what we have here, Neptune is at 29 degrees 56 minutes of Pisces. This is just 1 minute of arc difference from where it was uh, at the outbreak of the American Civil War. So that same point in the zodiac is essentially being reactivated at this time. Now, another aspect, which is going to turn out to be important, I call these transiting because, well, these are the planets on that day. We have transiting Mercury opposite transiting Pluto. This is going to be a conflict between what people's logical left brains are telling them, as represented by Mercury, and what some group that is holding power is imposing upon them. Pluto is now in Aquarius. That represents power to the people, as we say. More accurately speaking, it's a transfer of power from individuals to groups. And whether we're talking about groups of people or other kinds of groups, that doesn't necessarily mean that that power is going to be used wisely. It simply means that the power is in the hands of a group of people, like the United Nations or the European Union, or in our case, the Supreme Court, rather than a single individual. So, this action by the Supreme Court on this day, it conflicts with what the logic of our left brain tells us, and it is in conflict with what we feel we need for security, personal security, as represented by the sign of Cancer. So, this is the background. With Neptune at this particular position, it's going to be making the same kind of aspect to Venus in the USA chart that it was at the time of the Civil War. And people are going to be upset uh, at this decision that is being forced upon them. Okay, remember this aspect too, Mercury opposite Pluto. All right, now let's see. Let's look at hard aspects that were being made to the USA chart, this July 2nd chart, at the time that this decision about presidential immunity was released? Well, we have a whole slew of hard aspects here. And at the top of the list, I have that Neptune is at 29 degrees 50 minutes, 6 minutes of Pisces, almost exactly where it was at the start of the Civil War. And this is the anaretic degree of Pisces. Now, I want to point out something. I talked a bit about the anaretic degree of a sign. How when a planet gets into the last degree of that sign, it will bring out the worst of that planet and that sign. But I should add to that that being in the last degree of Pisces, this is not only the last degree of a 30-degree cycle, a sign, it's also the last degree of this 360-degree cycle. It's the last degree of the zodiac itself. So there's a lot of stuff that may have been buried under the surface for a long time that's now going to start coming out in terms of various kind of I'll just call them false ideologies, false beliefs, misinformation, wild conspiracy theories. It's all coming out right now, confused logic coming out. Okay, now let's see, moving on. As I said, when we compare the transits at this time to the USA chart, again, we have Neptune making the strong square to Venus, which means it's, this position of the Supreme Court, it conflicts with our right brain, what we just feel in our gut to be right. It conflicts with our values that all men are created equal and no one is above the law. Okay, now in the July 2nd chart, we have a very, very strong square between Saturn and Mars. This square will also be present in July 4th charts. It's just Mars will have moved on a couple of degrees, so it's just not quite as strong. It's still strong, not quite as strong. So this doesn't mean that we will have violence today, violence tomorrow, but it is a good indication that there could be verbal or physical violence eventually resulting from this decision, and frankly, from other decisions that the Supreme Court has made under the leadership of John Roberts. Now, one thing, let me mention right now, if you just look at the USA chart in this inner wheel, there's a pretty strong square between Mars and Neptune. It's even stronger in July 4th charts, but you have it in both charts. And so there's always been this tendency of misinformation, false ideology, passionate beliefs to lead to violent rhetoric and oftentimes even physical violence. So that is kind of a hallmark for America. It can get into some delusional thinking about things, which can lead to uh, physical actions or physical or rhetoric, which is very aggressive. Okay, so transiting Saturn square natal Mars, this could lead to some violence down the road. Transiting Chiron semi-square Uranus, this could lead to some revolts, some revolutionary activities that could wound us. The transiting lunar nodal axis square the natal sun in America's chart. Well, the sun can represent the leader of the country, the president, particularly since with 7 degrees Libra rising, the sun is in the 10th house. And the lunar nodal axis, it tends to intensify things. So the power of the presidency is being intensified by this act. Uranus Semi-square the sun. Again, revolutionary activities revolting against the president and this near absolute immunity that has been handed to the presidency. This is going to be magnified by the fact that we have Jupiter making a strong conjunction to natal Uranus. Jupiter always expands and magnifies things. Uranus breaks up the existing pattern. At its best, it is creativity, intellectual breakthroughs, aha moments. At its worst, it is violent revolution. Transiting Mars, semi-square natal Venus. Again, people are going to be angry. This decision does not set well with their values. And finally, transiting Mercury opposite natal Pluto. Now, remember to not forget that aspect. Looking just at transits, we have transiting Mercury in opposition to transiting Pluto. But the same aspect is occurring as a transit to the USA chart. So that is setting up a resonance between America and the transits at this particular moment on July 1st. And this is why things are impacting America so much. Aspects by Mercury, transiting Mercury, they're usually pretty fast moving, as are aspects by the concerning the transiting moon. And so those planets often tend to act as triggers. And this aspect is both a trigger and it created a resonance with Mercury opposite Pluto just in the transit chart. So what's happening? We have a lot of people angry about this decision. It does not sit well with either their left brain or logic or their right brain values. And people are going to be wounded and spurred toward revolt and revolution, whether that just happens through angry rhetoric, as Gemini sometimes suggests, or whether angry rhetoric leads to physical action. Well, that is what people will decide for themselves. Uh, as I often say, astrology just gives us the cosmic weather, and it's only half the story. The other half are the decisions that we make through our free will in response to those conditions that we find ourselves in. Okay, now I want to look at some transits for this year uh, and for each succeeding year, all the way up through the year 2029. And then that actually takes us up to 2030. And I want to look at transits from Saturn on out. And let's see, I'm going to be particularly focusing on uh, some long-term transits, in particular Pluto making a sesquiquadrant to Mars, followed by Pluto making a sesquiquadrant to Neptune. Now, let me go back just a second here. Remember, I talked about how in this chart for America, we have this pretty strong square between Mars and Neptune. Pluto is a planet representing a lot of power. It's often called the planet of death and transformation. And so if it's making a sesquiquadrant to Mars, well, a sesquiquadrant often acts as a turning point, a breaking point of some sort. So when Pluto makes a sesquiquadrant to Mars, that could be a breaking point which results in violence. And when Pluto makes a sesquiquadrant to Neptune, well, since Mars and Neptune are in such a strong square, it's activating that square between them. So that could also result in violence as a result of misinformation or inflamed passions. Okay, now in a table like this, I show for 2024 all the hard aspects that are occurring for the planets Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, and the North Node. And so this is a good reference table to see exactly when certain aspects, hard aspects, are going to take place between the transing planets and the planets in this July 2nd, 1776 chart for the passage of the Resolution for Independence, the Declaration for Independence. You can see exactly when they take place. Over here, this graph shows some important transits that are going to occur in whatever this year is, but they occur, but they don't become exact. So this is also something good to refer to. For example, Neptune square Venus, that is going to be pretty strong in June, July, and into August of this year, but it doesn't become exact. Likewise, that Saturn square Mars, that is going to be pretty strong in June and July, but doesn't become exact. Chiron semi-square Uranus, that is also strong in July and August without becoming exact. And Saturn semi-square Pluto, that is going to be pretty darn strong in the second half of October, all of November, first half of December without becoming exact. The orb I'm using here is 1 degree. So these are all things that can cause discord this summer and then later on during our presidential election, even though they don't become exact. Okay, now on this next slide, I have another graph, but this is only showing aspects that become exact at some point during this year. And twice in this year, we have transiting Chiron, conjunct natal Chiron, and typically that tends to result in political wounding for the country. It can also result in environmental wounding and occasionally in acts of violence, uh, mass shootings in which several people are wounded or killed, for example. So there's going to be a certain amount of wounding this year. In fact, at the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse, transing Chiron was very close to natal Chiron in our July 2nd, 76 chart for America. And Sun, Moon, and Chiron were all exactly conjunct to the degree, making this a year of wounding for much of the world and a year of wounding for America in particular. But as I said before, we have a pattern of experiencing this wounding more as political wounding. So that's happening last April, now, and also this November. Okay. And then another thing to keep an eye on is Uranus making a semi-square to the sun. Uh, this is going to be active in this summer and later on this year. This can have to do with perhaps the Supreme Court's decision on immunity for the president. This could also have to do with questions that are swirling right now about President Biden's energy and competency for the job in his advanced years. He's, I believe, 81 now. And after his recent debate performance, even though he's had a stellar presidency in his first term, there are now questions of does he have the physical and mental energy to continue? Okay. Now, moving into 2025, we have a few more hard aspects this year over the previous year. You can just compare the number of entries, and you can see Here's where we'll have some strong aspects that don't come to fruition. Uh, Uranus semi-square the midheaven. This is something that could affect the leaders of our country in general, the presidency in particular. And remember, Uranus always breaks up the existing pattern, tends to bring about change of one sort or another. What that change will be, I don't know. But whatever happens is most likely to happen in January or February of 2025. In July and August, we have transiting Chiron square natal Pluto. And let's go back to the USA chart for a moment. Pluto, given that this birth time is accurate for America, Pluto would be in the fourth house. That would be the homeland, the people. So there is a question here. Is this going to be a wounding of people that hold power, or is it going to be a wounding of the homeland, the people, or both? Could be both. What will happen? I don't know. But whatever happens, this is when it's likely to happen in July, August of 2025. And here are some of the hard aspects that will come to fruition in 2025. These will all be exact at one point or another. We have a third time that we have Chiron conjunct natal Chiron. So January, February, some sort of wounding for the country, most likely political. And let's see, March, April into May, and September, October, November of next year. There will be periods where Neptune is exactly square natal Venus. And so some social movements or ideologies, social beliefs, they're going to be at conflict with people's core values, their right brain feelings during this period. And Chiron is going to make exact semi-squares to Uranus a couple of times throughout the year. And transing Uranus will make an exact semi-square to the natal sun in April. So late April, that's going to be critical too. And we see a lot of aspects involving Chiron, Chiron square Mercury, Chiron square Moon. There could be wounding of one sort or another for uh, commerce, the economy, and the people next year. Saturn square Venus. Saturn always puts restrictions on things, regulations on things. Again, Venus is our right brain. It's how we feel about things, what we like, what we don't like, what we value. And so we're going to be feeling those restrictions at times next year. And Uranus making a sesquiquadrant to Saturn during a couple of periods in 2025. That is going to be a drive to break up the existing pattern or structure in America. So we're getting a little bit more attention next year. But I think the years 2026, 2027, 2028 are going to be the more critical years for America. Now, if you're using the Sibley chart, things shift a little bit and it's more 2027, 2028, 2029. So we can look and see which chart looks best, or possibly they both work equally well in 2026 through 2029. Uh, all of those years may be difficult years for America. Okay, we get into 2026. You don't have to count to notice that this list of hard aspects is a lot longer than my previous two lists. And using the July 2nd, 1776 chart for America, this is where we get into Pluto making a sesquiquadrant to Mars. And look how long this lasts, from February all the way into mid-August. Okay, we have other things going on too, like Saturn square the midheaven. That's going to put some restrictions on American power or the American president or other people with power in America. We have transing Uranus making a semi-square to natal Chiron. That will last for a while, and this results in some sudden wounding for America. We also have Neptune square Venus. That continues into the first couple of months of 2026. But this is the one that concerns me the most, is Pluto's sesquiquadrate Mars, because that could result in a lot of violence. When we get into 2027, we still have a lot of hard aspects, and we have let's see, several aspects which will be strong that don't become exact. Pluto sesquiquadrate Neptune. Remember, Neptune, we have that strong square between Neptune and Mars in the birth chart for America, whether you use July 2nd or July 4th. So with Pluto making a sesquiquadrate to natal Neptune, it's activating that square, which can in turn result in violence based on inflamed passions and beliefs. Uh, Neptune in opposition to the ascendant. There could be some sort of misinformation coming from other countries. Chiron semi-square Mars, that can be physical wounding. Let's see, what do we have here? It looks like Uranus making a semi-square to Mercury, and then we have Uranus making a sesquiquadrate to the moon. So yes, people will be up in arms either figuratively or literally. They will be upset. They will want to revote August through October. And the semi-square to Mercury, that could affect people's thoughts, their ideas. It could affect commerce. It could affect the economy, communication. Okay, we get into 2027. Well, we've been in 2027, but we look at those aspects that become exact. And we have Pluto still sesquiquadrate Mars, and there are going to be several months that that's going to be in effect. And then we have a slew of negative or hard aspects by Saturn that will be putting restrictions on people and things. We still have Chiron squaring Pluto that can cause some wounding to people with power. A Saturn opposition, transing Saturn opposite natal Saturn, and then followed by a conjunction with Chiron. This will certainly stir the pot in March and April of 2027. So some sort of frustration that can boil over. And then this is also very important. Transiting Uranus conjunct natal Uranus. Whenever Uranus has been about at this position of about 8 degrees Gemini, America tends to find itself at war either internally or externally. So Uranus was at 8 degrees Gemini during the American Revolution. We had our first Uranus return at the start of around the start of the American Civil War. At the next Uranus return, we were involved in World War II. And so there's great concern about what is going to happen to America uh, in 2027 when transiting Uranus becomes conjunct with natal Uranus. Well, it's all quite interesting. I've said when I was looking at the transits of the Supreme Court decision to America's chart, I noted that strong square between Saturn and Mars. I said, this doesn't mean violence today, it doesn't mean violence tomorrow, but it could mean violence somewhere down the road as a result of the Supreme Court decision. And as a result of that decisions and others, we can begin to get more violence as Pluto makes a sesquiquadrate to natal Mars, and more revolution as transing Uranus becomes conjunct with natal Uranus. Okay, and then we get into 2028, and again, you can see lots and lots of hard aspects. Now, this year, there aren't any near misses. There aren't any hard aspects by the outer planets that become strong but don't quite become exact. If they become strong, they become exact that year. And this is the year where we start to get Pluto making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune, which again activates that Neptune-Mars square in the natal chart. And again, let's see, we also have Neptune in opposition to our ascendant. So there could be propaganda, misinformation from other countries that is affecting us negatively. We have transiting Uranus conjunct our natal Uranus a third time, and we have Neptune making a square to the midheaven. Some sort of false claims about the president or people in power. And let's see. And we have some other stuff going on, which doesn't last quite as long, but we have transiting Chiron making a sesquiquadrate to natal Neptune. That is also going to be activating that Neptune Mars square in the natal chart, and there could be wounding as a result of that. Okay, also Saturn semi-square Mars. That could result in some violence. Now we get into this final year, 2029. And again, now we don't have quite so many hard aspects. We do have a few that will make an impact, but don't come to fruition or exactness. We have Uranus making a sesquiquadrate to the moon, semi-square to Mars. So January, February, March, people are still going to be feeling revolutionary, and there may be some hiccups in the economy or uh, revolutionary ideas in people. Neptune square natal sun. There could be some misinformation regarding people in power. Okay. I believe I think that's going to be my last slide here. Oh, just the next to the last slide. Here I'm showing the aspects that become exact. And things are not as long lasting as they had been in the years 27, 28, or sorry, 26, 27, 28. We'll have Saturn making a semi-square to Mars last a while at the beginning of the year, as does transing Chiron making a semi-square to Mars. So again, some potential for violence, action of some sort or another. Saturn making a sesquiquadrate to the ascendant. That could impact things negatively, help us feel very restricted, and Saturn making a semi-square to the midheaven. That could impact the presidency. Okay, that's the last slide, so let me stop sharing here. And it looks like I'm out of focus on this camera. Let me see if I can change that a bit. Get back in focus here. I'm looking a little better. So that is going to be the end of this presentation that I called Supreme Lunacy, which talked about some of these decisions by the Supreme Court and how they may impact America for the rest of this decade. And as you can see, the years that I'm most concerned about are 2026, 2027, and 2028. And the aspects I'm probably most concerned about are transiting Pluto, making these long lasting sesquiquadrats to natal Mars and then to natal Neptune. And that could result in a lot of misinformation and flame passions and violence in the country. And if you're using the Sibley chart, then the years impacted may shift by year. It may be 2027, 2028, 2029. But as I say, both charts uh, could be in effect. And so it could be 2026 through 2029 where we feel those impacts most strongly. So there are going to be some good things that happen in the second half of this decade that are good for the world, but America's going to have its problems. And throughout the rest of this year and in early next year, we have transit Chiron coming into conjunction with natal Chiron. So uh, that portends for some more political wounding and probably environmental wounding also, and maybe even mass shootings. So we live in interesting times, and our democracy is it's still up in the air. Let's just hope that the majority of us make good decisions on November 5th this year during the presidential election, and that we elect someone who is not only capable, but who is also truthful and who is truly interested in the country and not just in themselves. So uh, I'll leave that up to you, but I hope we get good leaders in the years ahead to help us through the crises that we may face. So, with that, I'll end this recording and I'll just say so long and be well, and I hope to see you again. So long.